Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Rapping with the Rep. I'm State Representative Ken Gordon, and we're going to have an exciting and important show here. We're going to talk about issues involving diversity, equity, and inclusion, what we call DEI. And we're welcoming to our show our guest, Mayor Brian Arrigo, the Mayor of Revere, as well as Maritsa Barros, who is the Chief of Talent and Culture for the City of Revere. We also have Select Board Member Nick Priest from Burlington. Welcome, Nick, and welcome, Mayor, and welcome to Dr. Barros. We are presenting this show because the towns in our district, in my district, Burlington and Bedford, are addressing and struggling with issues involving diversity, equity, and inclusion, but they're not unique. The towns are not unique in that many of the towns in our municipalities are struggling with these issues and discussing these issues. And the issues that they're facing are also not unique. And for that reason, the MAPC, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, which is an agency that looks at issues facing the 110 or so municipalities within the greater Boston area, as well as the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, what they call GARE, and the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. They've gotten together to study ways in which we can communicate between municipalities and between experts and municipalities on how we can have the conversations that will address these important but difficult issues. Now, the municipalities were chosen by the MAPC. There were 6 of them. They include the town of Bedford, and they also include the city of Revere. That's why Mayor Arrigo is here with us today. And I really want to thank the town manager from Bedford, Sarah Stanton, who suggested Mayor Arrigo as a municipal leader who's addressed these issues of DEI, confronted them head on, and made some real progress in his city. So we're going to talk to Mayor Arrigo about his experience in Revere and also what he has seen among the DEI municipalities. So they include, as I said, Bedford. They also include Natick, which has an economy and a population that you can compare to Burlington. It includes the town of Stoughton. It includes Framingham. Talking about DEI is different than many of the responsibilities that select board members or mayors or city managers have in their day-to-day world, because we're talking about how to bring up topics. We're talking about how to bring up topics that that municipal leaders face, that perhaps have they're looking at how have we opened our municipality to opportunity to people for decades. The issue of DEI means, are we making the best effort to open up the opportunity for our residents to run for office in our towns and cities, to be appointed to offices within our towns and cities, and to be hired for positions within our towns and cities? Are we doing it in a way that's most inclusive, and looking at our policies and practices to see if it's consistent with that? The issue here, especially in Bedford and Burlington, the issue, the towns I know, are that we have municipal leaders who want to do the right thing, but now engaging in a conversation that may expose, may reveal that maybe in their attempt to do the right thing, there are things that could be done better. And we've got to separate any feelings of guilt or responsibility or anything like that to, well, what can we do better going forward? That's why this is a difficult conversation, and that's why I want to talk about it here on our show. So I'm going to turn it over first to Mayor Arrigo to talk about your experience in Revere, what you saw coming in, and what you were able to do to bring the city closer toward becoming a much more inclusive and open municipality for all of its residents.
For us, it's about making sure that our government and the services that we provide in the city represent the diversity of our community. And so we went into the Remap process really excited about the prospects of being able to think about structural change and really transparently and effectively attack some of these issues, knowing that we're not going to very easily see the outcomes. This is work that's very iterative. This is work that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and it can be uncomfortable, but it's so important. For me, it's so important to make sure that we're representing the community here in our city, and that when residents are interacting with City Hall or with anyone that represents the city, that we're doing it in a way that is fair, is treating people with respect, and really serving the residents who live in our city. And so, again, I want to thank you for creating the space and taking the time, because change is really hard. We've gone through a lot of change in the city of Revere, and communities all over the Commonwealth and all over the country are going through a lot of change. But as difficult as change is, I think what's important for people to remember is that if you don't change, you ultimately get left behind. And so as a community that's growing, and what I like to think of as being on the cutting edge, we certainly don't want to get left behind. We have to go through these sometimes difficult conversations and difficult community-driven process that ultimately does help us serve our residents. So, I want to thank you for creating the space, and I can't do this alone. That's the other really important part, and I'm sure that Nick knows this. In Burlington, this work really requires that you have really great people around you, and I can't think of anybody better in the Commonwealth than Dr. Barros, who has come on board in the city of Revere. And so to have folks leading this work, it starts at the top, obviously, but to have other folks leading this work is really important. And Dr. Barros has been a tremendous addition to the city of Revere, and I'm happy that she was able to make it today.
Thank you very much, Mayor Arrigo. Dr. Barros, tell us what it's like. I mean, you've in talking to municipal leaders. I think you were in Framingham before Revere, so you've got experience in doing that. Talk to us about your experience and the receptions you've received, things that you've talked about maybe with the Remap program. I know it's a difficult conversation, but what have you found success? Essentially, what has worked?
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Mayor Arrigo, for bringing me along in this conversation. Very important conversation, and always challenging in trying to think about how do we even enter the conversation to meet folks where they are. I think that at the core, education is going to be the key, right? For so many of us as professionals, we haven't been trained and taught to activate our lens around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so when we're talking about DEI, it is feeling like a whole nother, foreign language, even sometimes to folks to understand what are we talking about? How do I engage? What am I doing wrong? And right, we have to start having conversations about intent versus impact to help distance ourselves from that guilt or shame of feeling like we've let people down, we haven't done our work well enough, to understand that it hasn't been our fault that we've gotten to this place. I'll talk a little bit about how the state in which I found the city of Revere that I thought was very helpful coming into this work. My academic background or my doctoral work was in this research as well. So I understood the trajectory of these roles, chief diversity officers, in my case, chief officer of talent and culture. These types of positions surged in the business industry, in the business sector, right? And then maybe a decade or so later, you saw it really show up in higher education. And now here's the boom for municipal work and government work with this lens. So it is new to folks. It was really great to start this process as a city with the support of Remap. So the Racial Equity Municipal Action Plan was a year-long process, and it was an opportunity for practitioners to actually understand what it is this work entails, to help us really assess what the action plan would be. in the city of Revere, the infrastructure was the first thing that Mayor Arrigo, put in place, and actually would be following signing up. First was committing, regardless of having the infrastructure, we have committed, similar to the work Nick is doing with his committee, to say, all of us are going to take ownership in what this means to move us forward, and we're committed to this work. So then the infrastructure comes to support that work, right? So it's the creation of my position currently, and then coming into the role and having a team of folks who've already owned it and are not looking for this hero to come in this one position, right? And make it all right. But instead, having that position come in to serve as a leader, a person who has some expertise to help guide folks, but that ownership amongst the team has been what's been most, very much a blessing for me coming into this role, into this city that is obviously changing very quickly demographically. So I would say the commitment to the work, also helping folks reframe and understand that this work all starts at the individual level, right? If we're going to change practices, we're going to change systems, we have to change our individual selves first. So that's where, for me, coming into this work, I feel it has felt like it's working. It's because of the support structure, the support of myself with the mayor, having that strong partnership with him, and then moving towards normalizing just even having the conversation are some of the things that I'm paying attention to right now.
Dr. Barros, thank you very much for, what you just said, if I was to step back and kind of unpack topic by topic, what you just said, I realize we could do 2 hours in a conversation just on what you said, because what you said is so important. One of the things that Bedford just went through in a political election and thankfully rejected was the idea that studying race relations in the past, American race relations, will cause guilt among our children. And because we've got to protect our children from that guilt, we shouldn't study it at all, or at particular ages. As if certain members of our community feel that their story shouldn't be told because it might cause guilt. And what you just said is so important, is if you could separate that, if a child can learn about mistakes that were made in the past, can learn about the history that includes things that we would not repeat, that's how you learn and not repeat. And the other thing you said, and I'm going to turn to you now, Nick, to comment on this, is that we have to actually establish a language, because the language that we use, those words themselves can help us to separate the guilt from what we need to do to move forward and address the issues in front of us, as opposed to entirely behind us. Certainly things start and then they progress. But if we can look forward, we can solve our problems. Nick, what's been your experience, and tell us your views?
Yeah, I, like Dr. Barros was saying, the notion of this starting in businesses and organizations was where I was first exposed to the nature of diversity, equity, and inclusion as I hate to call it, say, a topic, right? Because it's something that's woven into our lives. Because again, as Dr. Barros said, this is something that we have to work on the individual level, right? And begin to kind of self-reflect, on these things. And so, looking at the census numbers and seeing how much more diverse Burlington is becoming, it seemed like a natural step forward to say, that the town should start to look at this as well, right? The schools brought on Ray Porch as the director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they're working toward those kinds of discussions from a school perspective. So, from a town perspective, we should also make sure that, we're doing everything in our power to be as inclusive and as open as possible, right? And to understand that my perspective is not the only perspective that can possibly exist, nor my life experiences, right? And how can we begin to, broaden our level of understanding so that we can be more prepared to have those harder conversations?
How do you get, and to the folks, Dr. Barros and Arrigo, you're going through this process a little bit further along, and also in working with other municipalities through Remap. How do you get to that point where municipal leaders in general are able to separate what they may feel responsible for, even if they weren't acting with intent, to get to that conversation of, okay, let's let's move forward now. Let's put all those feelings, if we don't need to defend ourselves here. Let's understand that we weren't trying to be part of the problem, but move forward.
So I'll take a stab at it, and then I'll let Dr. Barros maybe jump in. But I'd say that what we were able to do, and this is what was a great opportunity that was kind of presented by the Metropolitan Area Planning Council and the folks from the Fed Reserve and GARE, which is the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, who all kind of work together to bring the 6 communities to go through Remap, was it gave us an opportunity to identify some folks within City Hall, within city organization, who came from all different backgrounds and all different places, and were able to dedicate the time to and the space to have conversations that were kind of far outside of what their normal course of work is, but really got at the fact that there are things that we need to do to tackle structural and institutional racism. And so I think, for us, it was finding those folks initially within the organization who could have those conversations and start to learn the language and start to become culturally competent around certain issues. And then, ultimately this work doesn't ever end, right? And Rep, we've talked about this. It's not like building a park, right? You don't just plan something and then make something beautiful and then you're done. Or maybe you have to maintain it a little bit. This is really deep work that has to continue on. And for us to be able to identify key folks in the organization to be able to have those conversations and understand this work and start to own that work, and for them to come from all different backgrounds, all different departments, all different kind of work and life experiences, was really powerful. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Barros, but I think that was our first step, was having this opportunity with Remap, and then identifying some of those leaders within the organization. And then we have a lot more work to do after that.
Yeah. I would just add that this work there's no, one size fits all, right? You really have to get really in tune with your residents and where people are, from the professional level, as well as those who are residents in the city or town. Let's be honest, race, if we look at the history of race, it's a man-made construct, right? And it was utilized to create divide, right? It was used to separate and compartmentalize folks. So we have to know that when we show up into this conversation today, we've all been conditioned to think a certain thing or feel a certain way or be oblivious because we didn't learn, right? The full history, the whole truths of what happened and how it happened. And so we have to come in, folks who are selected leaders to manage and lead this work. We have to come in and strategize in how we meet folks where they are. Sometimes we might have to make space for folks to have conversations in affinity spaces, right? Having affinity group conversations based on race is a great tool to utilize to allow folks to have conversations if we need to have separate conversations, just to sort of make sense of where we're at, what we're processing, and what we're being asked to do, and then find the ways to sort of bring the differences of just knowledge-based opinions, lived experiences, to then be able to come into a room and be willing to understand before being understood, right? We have to come in with some compassion and grace from the side of those of us whom have traditionally been receiving the oppressive, systems and experiences. And there's got to be a willingness to understand that if my intention as a professional and a colleague is to serve everyone, I have to recognize that the systems in which we work traditionally were not set up for that. That helps separate some of that guilt. So again, trying to meet folks where they are and create systems and resources, because you can't just say, you've got to do better being inclusive, and then we don't have the resources to support people in building that capacity and, growing forward. Because as Mayor Arrigo says, this is a lifelong journey. And it's really important that we do the work at both levels, individually and systematically.
Thank you very much, Dr. Barros. It's very important what you just said. And it made me think that, one issue is that we can think about the words that we use, because the words that we use may be innocent enough to us in the context of the way we use them. They're perfectly neutral. But to the person who hears the words that we use, it may mean an entirely different thing. Something as simple as when a job becomes open, well, who do you know? That seems simple enough. But to someone else who feels that they've been put into the margin of our community, that question in and of itself may mean, well, I'm not going to be considered because I don't know that person. Of course, we post jobs publicly. We've got to do that. We've got to, again, cast a wide opportunity for people to become included and have them feel welcome once they are included. So it's a job that's much different than a municipal leader has confronted before. Maybe a job that's much different than they thought they would be confronting. But we know now it's an important job that we don't have to finish, but we certainly have to start. And we have to have these conversations beginning now. It's productive to start now. It's productive for people hearing it, knowing that we're making these efforts to think about things that were done in the past. Could they be done differently? And to understand why it might be that from another person's point of view, something that had no ill intent might be interpreted in a way that we didn't think and differently, and then and learn from that, listen to that, as you said. So these conversations about how do we define what we're saying, and how are we precise, and how are we talking about these issues, I think are very important. Nick, what's been your experience? What do you find? I mean, that's tough work, and I appreciate that you're doing it.
Yeah, it is. It's very tough work. I am recognizing my own inherent blindness, we'll say. And the DEI committee is working hard to dig and look at everything that we have as a town to say, where are the holes? Where were we not looking? What assumptions did we make, right? To Dr. Barros's point around, intended impact, right? Is that, by phrasing something a certain way, we may not have been intending to exclude anybody, but the impact is that we are, right? And so how can we identify those prior pitfalls, those prior failings, and rectify them? Right.
I'm interested, through the work with Remap, you've got included in the 6 communities, you've got Bedford. I'm interested in some of what you've learned about the contributions from that community, but also you've got Natick. Natick has an economy and a population, I think, very similar to Burlington. It's got a large retail economy like Burlington. And so I think we might be able to learn some lessons that are useful for Burlington by looking at the work you've done with Natick. So I want to turn to you, Mayor. I mean, I know that you have learned a lot about these issues as they affect the cities like yours, but have you also learned, and can you share with us any of the lessons that would be helpful in suburban communities like the ones here in Burlington and in Bedford?
I would say that at the end of the day, on a local level, you're always working on behalf of your residents, right? And so, and that doesn't matter if it's a town of 50 people or the city of Boston with hundreds of thousands. You work for the residents of your community, and so I think we all have different challenges and different opportunities, but what we at a very basic level all kind of share is the fact that we want to represent our community the best that we can. And we want to make sure that that the values of the community are reflected in the work that we do, and that and I think every, I hope every local leader, ultimately wants to do what's best for every single individual in their community, right? No matter if it's the newest baby born in your community or the oldest senior, you're looking out for them, and at some level, you're representing them, and you're representing them like on their behalf in what we do for the city, and you're providing services to them. And for us to do that fairly and equitably, and to do it in a way that that makes sure that every single person is heard, is a challenge, right? I mean, I think every community is challenged and always constantly working towards making sure that you're working on behalf of your residents. But one thing that I think about is, I think most communities, and definitely the communities that were on Remap, had one thing in common, which is wanting to attract and be attractive to commercial development, create jobs, and create a workforce in their community. And if we truly want to do that, we should also be reflective of the values and the morals of the business community. And Dr. Barros mentioned earlier how the evolution of some of this work really started in the private sector. It's gone to the higher ed world, and now it's kind of reached municipal government. But if you want to be an attractive place for people to do business, you have to do a good job of representing all of your residents. And there are people that look at that and see how fairly and equitably you're able to provide services to your residents. So I think that at a base level is really what local government, what makes local government so great, is that you're constantly representing the people in your city, and to do that is such a challenge, but it can be some of the most rewarding work possible.
Nick, what the mayor said about economic development, and I've seen that directly. I want to talk to you about that too. Is that what you've seen? You learn, as you said, you were introduced to the topic in the private sector, so this must be really meaningful to you too, this tie-in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredibly important. Companies are investing a lot of time and resources and energy into, this, as a holistic approach to, having these conversations more openly and educating the workforce. So as we, look at our own economic, vitality here in Burlington, we want to make sure that, we have all of our bases covered from, a municipal standpoint, so that, companies are also, wanting to make Burlington their home.
Thank you. We're reaching the end of our half hour. Before we close, though, I just want to turn to Mayor specifically. I know that you've really shared some experiences that I think are very useful for us here in Burlington and in Bedford. Is there anything else that you've seen in the city or in your work with Remap that you think you'd like to leave us with?
Yeah, I think the one thing that folks may hear conversations like this one and say, okay, what are the, what are the end results, or what are the metrics for success, right? How do you measure, what direction you're going in, or how successful you're at in terms of really trying to root out and tackle structural and institutional racism. And so, there are things that we do look at, and I think that's really an important piece. Is that there are the conversations and the challenges that go along with that, and bringing the community along, and the change that goes along with that. There's also the work that needs to be done, like on as an organization, right? And so we look at everything from the number of grievances that are given out or that are kind of announced in our employees or by our employees. We're tracking the amount of professional development opportunities that we provide to our employees. We're making sure that City Hall staff is hiring the population that we're serving, right? And that the people who have the lived experience are represented here in the city, that our boards and commissions represent the community at whole, that we're providing language opportunities and that we're making sure that language is not a barrier for folks to be able to interact with the community. And ultimately, kind of even gauging and using as a metric the number of conversations that we're having, and the surveys that we get feedback from the community about this work and how kind of challenging it can be. But I think one thing that gets lost in some of this is that there are ways to measure where you're going and how where you want to be. And so those are some of the pieces, but and this is all an iterative process that changes constantly, which is what makes some of this work so challenging, but also makes it so important, because this has to live on far beyond my tenure in the mayor's office. It should be living on throughout City Hall and throughout the generations to go after.
Realize that these conversations were ongoing, we're beginning in Revere, and then apply for positions or run for offices or things like that? Or did you proactively have community events and things like that to describe these opportunities for people?
So I would say I've been attempting since I got into office to make sure that we represent everybody in the city. Now, and I would say that our focus has gotten stronger and in terms of the infrastructure that we've built, in terms of having somebody like Dr. Barros on board and having and building a city government that is more reflective of the residents. But I'll give you one quick story. The first job I had to hire was actually in my election department, and I mentioned the demographic changes in the community. We went from 62% white to 45% white in the last 10 years, and we've gone from 24% Hispanic to 37% Hispanic in the last 10 years. We've had a really marked shift in our demographics. First job I had to hire, which I had no HR department at the time. I had just barely won an election, so I won by the skin of my teeth. And a lot of folks assumed that I was just going to put a former campaign worker into the election department, because that's the way that you hired people, was you just took the people that worked for you and you brought them into City Hall. And so what we said was, no, we're going to post this job. I want to have a preference for somebody that can speak Spanish. Just a preference, not a requirement, preference. And the amount of pushback that I got from both the people inside City Hall, the people outside of City Hall, my own supporters who were, saying to me, what are you trying to do? Just put somebody in that and just hire them. Like, what's the big deal? This is a clerk job in the election department. It's not a quote unquote an important job. It's not a department head job. You can find somebody to just put into that office. And I said from the very beginning, we have to do this right. We have to post a job. We have to make sure that we're trying to attract people to come work for the city. Part of what I ran on was the fact that I felt like the city was run and that jobs were given out. I always joked about it being the friends and family plan, where jobs weren't ever posted, right? There wasn't an HR department. It was very scattered, and you could kind of get away with a lot. We wanted to redirect that focus and make sure that we were attracting people to come work for the city who lived here and who had lived experiences that they could bring into our community and into our into City Hall. And so I guess like just a small kind of story of like we went from that basically my first day in to now almost 7 years later. I have a chief of talent and culture. I have folks who have gone through a process like Remap for a year-long process in terms of thinking about strategizing and coming up with the ways in which we're going to continue to change the culture in the city and in City Hall, and make sure that we don't ever find ourselves in that place again where there's an unbelievable amount of pushback for a job that had a preference on language, language capability. So that's really the work. And again, I thank you for taking the time and creating the space to have this conversation and bringing us into this, because this is all, nobody's doing this work perfectly. And this is all a process, and we're all learning from each other. And it's really great to have these kinds of conversations.
Well, I really appreciate you being willing to share those experiences, and congratulations and thank you for the story that you just shared with us as an example of how you can, from the beginning, keep in mind and put into practice opportunities for people that didn't exist prior to the decisions that you were made and that you made in the conversations that you had. I want to thank you all. I know that the municipal leaders in Bedford, because Sarah Stanton is a member of your group and she's excited to continue to work with you. But when I told the town administrator from Burlington, Paul Sagarino, that we were going to have this conversation on our cable show, he said he was excited to watch, and he asked if he could call you afterward with any advice that you may be able to share with him directly. And I said, I suspect so, from the conversation we had that led up to this recording. So your work is very much appreciated and respected. Nick Priest, thank you very much for joining in this conversation.
Thanks for having me.
For the work that you're doing in Burlington and with the Burlington Select Board. It's important work. It's not easy.
Right.
Everybody, thank you for tuning in to Rapping with the Rep. And until then, see you next time.